I've been working on what I'd call my dream guitar. It's a custom design, has a flame top, and really it's everything I've ever wanted to build. But here's the thing, I'm not keeping it. I gave it to a friend, and he definitely wasn't expecting it. You'll find out why I gave it to him later in this video, and he's not the only one I'm giving a guitar to. Stick around to find out how you could end up with one of my builds too. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do to build this guitar is take some really expensive wood and glue it together. And this wood is really expensive because it's what's called curly maple, and it's a piece of master grade curly maple. I get these pieces of wood from Kimball Hardwoods. Kimball Hardwoods is great. They mill your wood, they send you these really small pieces, and they're pre-jointed so you can just glue them together. So right now I'm taking some glue and just putting it on the edge that I'm going to join to the other edge of that piece of wood. And then this is my little jig that I use to glue these small pieces together. It's from a website called Luthier's Mercantile, which unfortunately went out of business, but I was able to pick this up before they went out of business. You just use these little shims here, and you hammer them in between these pieces of rope, and it just holds those two pieces of wood really tight together. After about 24 hours, I'll pull it out of the jig. You notice there's some squeeze out on the top of the wood there, and the piece is a little warped. The warp is okay. That'll just flatten out when we glue it onto the body of the guitar. But to get the squeeze out, we're going to use a card scraper. And I'll just run over this a couple times to take off the little excess glue on there. Also use this time to go over the rest of the top as well. And this just smooths out the top. And then if one piece is a little higher than the other, it'll just make sure that seam is nice and level. I'm using sapele for the body, and this is actually a piece of ribbon sapele. I also got this from Kimball Hardwoods. It's about 13 inches long, so I'll just mark the center of this and draw a center line. Center line is really important because it's how we'll align it on the fixture when I CNC, and also how I'll align the top on this piece of wood. So I take an 1/8 inch bit and just drill it on the top and the bottom of that piece of wood and screw it in with some screws. And you want to make sure that this won't interfere with your body when you machine it out. So it needs to be further away from the outer bounds of the body. So I'll just make sure to measure this up with a little tape measure to make sure it's far enough apart. Now I'm taking some basic wood glue and I'm just rolling it on the base of the body here. I'll do it on the back of the top, and I'll glue these two pieces together. I use a vacuum bag from a company called Rocket Kit, and I have one for the neck as well. I use them when I'm both gluing on the fretboard for the neck and the tops on the bodies. They're really nice because they have this little strip of like sticky material that makes them really easy to seal up, and you can get a vacuum pretty easily on these bags. They're not quite as good as if you were to just clamp it up with some clamps, but they're good enough so that you don't get any gaps, and I find they work just fine for guitar building. Well, that's drying. Let's talk about my friend Dylan. This is Dylan right here. He's actually playing a guitar that I built for him a couple of years ago that he bought for me. But yeah, you can see me down the right-hand corner filming him right here. Dylan's an amazing guitar player. He plays in multiple bands. He's actually flown all over the world to play. He's played at large venues. But even cooler, Dylan is a great friend. I know him personally, and we both have kids that are about the same age, but he's just a great guy to talk to. He's helped me through some rough patches with my mental health before. And he actually knows a bunch of musicians in the local area where I live that he's connected me to, and I've actually sold guitars to those people that he connected me to. With the amount of guitars that I've sold, it's actually paid for a guitar to build, and I thought it'd be a really cool idea if, to say thank you for being such a good friend, I built him a guitar of his dreams. So we've been talking about this guitar for a while. He doesn't know that I'm building it, but I have kind of casually asked him, like, hey, like, if you would ever want me to build a guitar, like, what would you like in it? What are some of the specs that you would want? And he described this guitar right here. So right now I'm machining the body and hogging out some material. This is a 1/4 inch upcut end mill, and it's just doing some carve out passes, some adaptive clearing, and we're carving out the back of the guitar. Really, this process is where I take some expensive wood and turn it into smaller, expensive wood. Right here, I'm cutting the contour of the body using that same 1/4 inch upcut end mill, and then I do a bunch of operations on the pockets. The next thing we'll do is mill the neck for this guitar. So I'm taking my neck fixture and I'm just putting it on the table of the CNC. Then I hold these in with some little clamps that came with my CNC. The whole piece of wood on the fixture, I use the blue painter's tape and CA glue trick. Forms a really nice bond. It's really hard to move this piece from side to side once that blue painter's tape and glue is on there, but you can pull it up really easily because only the adhesive from the tape is holding that piece on the table. Next, I'm going to do a surfacing operation. Right here, I'm just Z-indexing that bit. And if you want to know how I build guitar necks, I made a video about it a couple months ago. You can go check that out on my channel. This is just surfacing that piece of wood so that it's the right thickness. And now I'm taking a 1/4 inch upcut end mill and I'm indexing it to the corner of my fixture. And then we're going to use a couple different bits to do some operations. This is just cutting the truss rod, and now we're thicknessing the headstock. This guitar is a little different. I actually decided to put an inlay for the logo. Usually I have a metal logo that I just screw on, but I thought it'd be cool to have an inlay for this guitar. And then once that's done, I'll flip the piece over and then machine the back. So the first operation is an adaptive cut with a 1/4 inch end mill, and then the other one was a smoothing operation with a ball end mill. I use tabs to make sure my pieces are held within the stock on the machine while I'm milling them. And it's just a safety precaution. I've had a few pieces when I just use the blue painter's tape trick that fly off when I do the full contour to cut through the piece. So I just use the tabs to make sure everything's held in within inside of that stock. And it does mean I have to do some cleanup, but I just run it over the router table and clean up those tabs with a flush cut bit. Here's that inlay that I'm using. This is just a headstock veneer that I cut the little inlay out of. I use a really small fret cutting bit to cut these out. And then when I'm installing these pieces, I just use a little bit of CA glue within the pocket, and then I'll line up that piece and just tap it in with a hammer. And I always make sure to cut these pieces a little smaller than the pocket, or the pocket a little bigger than the piece. And it just makes it easier to put that piece inside of the pocket once you're done. Here I'm milling the fretboard. I'm using that same 1/4 inch upcut end mill. I contour the outline of the fretboard. And I just clean up the edge here with a 1/8 inch end mill. Then I'll use a 1/16 end mill to cut the inlays and the nut slot. I'll do the frets, and then I'll do a parallel operation to do the contour on the fretboard. Here's my side dot jig. A lot of people in my last video told me that I don't need this and I should just probably do it by hand. And they're right, but I have this tool, so might as well use it. But basically I just use it to get some nice parallel side dots, and I don't have to measure out each individual side dot before I drill it. Take it over to my drill press, and then I'll just use a 2mm bit to drill out these holes. For the inlays on this guitar, I'm using mother of pearl. I get these online, just put a little bit of glue in the holes here, and then I'll tap it in with a hammer. To attach the fretboard onto the neck, I'm using this really small drill bit. I forgot the measurements of this drill bit. You can get them in little tubes with like 10 bits or something like that, but I'll give you the measurements down in the description. I use this with some wire, so it's the same gauge wire as the drill bit. I'll drill through the fretboard into the neck, and then I'll put a piece of wire in the neck and just align that fretboard. And the reason why I do this is because when you glue up the fretboard, you can kind of get some movement just because the glue's in between the fretboard and the neck. And so it likes to slip around when you're trying to glue it up. And those alignment pins just help keep everything in place so you get a nice, perfect alignment. And you don't have to worry about it slipping around when you're putting it in the vacuum bag. It's that same Rocket Kit vacuum bag. This one's a little bit longer though, and I use it for necks. So we should probably talk about the specs of this guitar. You've noticed that it's a flame maple guitar. My friend Dylan loves really figured tops. All of the guitars that he has in his arsenal currently have figured tops, so I figured, no pun intended, that I would make a figured top for this guitar. He's a big fan of Gibson guitars, so he likes kind of like the Les Paul look. And so I thought it'd be really cool if I made a bolt-on neck style flat top guitar with more of a Gibson look. In the past, Dylan has sent me a couple different pictures of guitars that he thinks look really cool, and one of those guitars had a reverse burst. So typically with a sunburst guitar, you have a darker ring around the outside, and then a lighter color in the middle. But the reverse burst is the opposite. So it has a darker center and then a lighter sunburst around the outside. I'm going to attempt to do this, but I'm going to be using Angelus leather dyes. So I don't know how well it'll turn out, but we'll see how it looks when I get there. Right here, I'm just sanding out the guitar, making sure everything on the sides of the guitar is nice and smooth. And when I do this on a binded guitar, I want to make sure that I don't go too far. So I use some 220 sandpaper on the oscillating sand to make sure I don't accidentally take off too much material. Speaking of the binding, I'm just fitting the binding to the guitar here, so I'll use a heat gun and soften up that plastic and make sure it bends to the side of the guitar. Then once I have everything taped in, I'll go back with some acetone. The acetone melts the ABS plastic for the binding and fuses it to the side of the guitar. When you do this, make sure to get a lot of acetone on that binding because otherwise you won't get a nice adhesion. It's especially important to use acetone instead of CA glue for guitars with a stained top. CA glue will actually sink into the wood and make your stain not look as good because the stain won't take into the wood properly. After it's done, that binding is a little raised from the edge, so I'll take my card scraper, just make sure it's nice and flush. Next, I'll take my chisel and clean up the neck pocket. I really like using the chisel on the binding because it's really easy to cut and super satisfying. Then I have this little sanding block that I use to just get a nice, perfectly flat seam on that binding. After the binding's done, I'll hit it with a sanding block. Just use some 220 grit, make sure this binding is perfectly flat with the body. I'll go over the whole guitar with this. The CNC won't drill holes through the body like this because it only is able to mill in the Z-axis. So I'll use these really long drill bits to drill some holes through the body. First one's an 1/8 inch bit, and then the second one's a 3/8. I'll do one from the first pickup cavity to the second pickup cavity, and then I'll do one from the second pickup cavity into the electronics cavity. This is just so I can run the wires from the pickup into the electronics cavity and wire everything up. Now I'm drilling a hole for the output jack. I just used a 7/8 inch drill bit here. I drill a pilot hole first to keep that drill bit straight, and then I'll use the 7/8 to go all the way through the body. The next step is sanding the guitar. So first I'll do the edges, and then I'll use my power sander to go over the back and the top of the guitar. I start with 180 sandpaper, and then I go to 220. I'll wet it down, and then I'll go to 320 just to get a final sand on this. I'm using Angelus leather dyes for this guitar. They are alcohol-based dyes, and they get a really nice color when you put it on the wood. I'm mixing 2 parts yellow dye and 1 part orange dye to get kind of an amber look. I think the color on this base turned out absolutely amazing. And so here I'm just doing a couple coats on the top to get even coverage. And then I'm going to come back and do the burst on this guitar. So he originally asked for a reverse burst, and I tried it, just wasn't vibing with it. Looked like I spilled coffee on it, so I just decided to start over and sand it all out, and I went back to just the normal amber color. I think it was just a little too splotchy, so I really liked that first color I put on it, and I just took it back. The cool thing is when I sanded it back out, some of that color stayed in the figure of the guitar and really made it pop. I'm using Osmo PolyX for this guitar, and I use Osmo on all of the either stained guitars or natural guitars I build. It's technically a flooring product, and it's a hardening oil. So when this dries, it'll become waterproof and very durable. But the trick is you have to apply it in a certain way in order to not get any bleed through with the stain. So you notice when I first do the first 2 coats on this guitar, you'll get some bleed through on that little towel that I'm using to apply this material. And so you have to wait several days between the first 2 coats and the second 2 coats. I do a total of 4 coats. And that drying time will make sure that the oil fully hardens before you go on with another coat and seal it all in. After I do those couple coats, I'll go on to the back. And the back you don't have to be as careful about because there's no stain. So I'll just put 3 coats on the back with about a day of drying time in between. While that's drying, I'll go and work on the neck. So right here, I'm just filing down some of the high spots on those inlays that I installed. Again, I used mother of pearl inlays for these, and I think it looks beautiful with this neck. I really like the mother of pearl inlays because they just light up when you put the oil on the neck. And now I'm using my sanding block to kind of smooth out some of those machine lines that I got from my CNC. I use these really long sanding blocks that have a radius carved into them. Then I'll take it over to my drill press and drill some holes in the back of the neck so that I can bolt it onto the guitar body. Next up is the fretwork. So I'm going to be using this fret press here. The first step is making sure that my fret wire is the right radius. So I pass it through this radius tool and it just basically bends the wire to the correct radius. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, wow, this looks really tedious, you're right, that's because it is. It takes a really long time to do the frets, and it's probably my least and also favorite part of the guitar building process because it's really satisfying to see those frets come together, but it does take a lot of time. So right here, I'm just showing you every step of the process. First, I'll just go through and make sure the fret's the right size, then I'll clip the tangs off. I'll use a fret file to file down the tangs a little bit, and then I'll put some glue in the slot. I'll press in that fret, and then I have to clip off the edges. Then you repeat this 21 or 22 times depending on how long your fretboard is. And so as you can tell, this does take a long time, but it's worth it in the end. Then I'll take my file and I'll just file down the edges so that they're flush. And then I'll take my neck to my vise and just start smoothing out all those machine lines that I get from the machining process. I always sand my guitars with several different grits of sandpaper. I start with 220 and then I'll go all the way up to 800. By the end, you have a really nice feeling neck that's super slick and ready for some oil. I use True Oil on the necks because I feel like it gets a really nice sheen to it. Just put a couple of coats of True Oil on it. You'll sand it back with some steel wool. Then you do 2 more coats of True Oil. Now I'm rolling the edges of the fretboard and doing some fretwork here. This just makes the guitar play really nice, and it'll make sure that my friend is not cutting his hands on the fret when he's sliding it up and down, doing some amazing solos. The last part of fretwork is both leveling the frets and then polishing the frets so they're nice and smooth. So I just use this flat beam to flatten all the frets, and then I'll crown them with this crowning file. I'll go over everything with a bunch of micro mesh pads, and I start from about I think 2,000 grit and it goes all the way up to 10,000. After the body dries, I need to scrape the binding. When you put the oil on, you'll get a little bit of oil runoff onto these binding strips. So I want to make that binding nice, bright, and white. I'll just scrape out the binding with a box cutter and make sure everything is perfectly white, and then I'll round it over with a little bit of sandpaper. Now I'm installing the hardware for the guitar. I put my ground wire underneath one of the ferrules and then I just press them in with my hand drill. I decided to put a Bigsby on this guitar. I noticed my friend didn't have a Bigsby and he always kind of talks about one, so I thought it was time for him to get a Bigsby. Next part is starting the electronics. I always like to shield my control cavities with conductive shielding paint. The shielding paint creates a Faraday cage around the electronics, which prevents unwanted noise from being picked up by those electronics. It's not super important to do this with guitars that have humbuckers, which I am planning to install on this guitar, but I'm also planning to do a coil split on those humbuckers, and when you do the coil split, then it's easier to pick up some noise. So I'll just put that shielding paint on the control cavity to prevent noise when you go into split mode. Here I'm just machining a couple more parts for the guitar, both the back control cover plate and also the pickguard. Next step will be fitting the nut. I have made a few nuts for different guitars in the past from scratch, but I much prefer these pre-cut nuts. They do require a little bit of extra finesse. You have to make sure it fits the nut slot pocket and you also have to sometimes file down some of those nut slots so that they're a little lower. But I just think the tone is really good, and it's a lot easier than making it from scratch. Now I'm starting to assemble the guitar. Parts on this one are really interesting. So I have a mastery bridge, and it works really well with the Bigsby. Then for the pickups, I'm using Lawler Imperial humbuckers. I'm just using 500K pots for this one with a coil split on the tone knob. Next up is the tuners, and in order to make sure those tuner peg heads fit into the guitar properly, I'm using these ferrules. And I'll just use my drill press to press those ferrules into place. And then I use a small drill bit and line those tuners up to the back of the neck, and use just this little straight edge to make sure all those tuners are straight and drill some holes. You might ask me, why do you not do this with the CNC? I don't really have an answer for you. I think I just never put it in my CNC files, and I don't really mind doing it at this point. I think it is easier to line it up perfectly with the neck after you've sanded it. Now I'm attaching the neck to the back of the guitar and some more hardware. And this is the moment where everything comes together or completely sounds like crap. There's really no in between. And it's the part that I don't really like, because I don't know if it's actually going to sound good until I get the strings on and play the first chords. But that's part of the excitement and why I keep coming back into building it. I actually did go to school for electrical engineering, but the funny thing is they never taught us how to solder. So if you notice my solder looks like crap, it's because I'm not a great solderer, but I can get by. And you can get some better soldering if you use lead-based solder, but I really just don't like using lead-based solder. So I stick with the lead-free stuff, and you have to get it really hot in order to get a nice bond. And it doesn't quite turn out as well, but I think it's the price you pay for your health and safety. Now I'm just putting the final touches on the guitar, like the knobs and the switch tip. And then I align the Bigsby to the guitar, make sure the strings go straight through the bridge, and then drill some holes to attach it. I'm putting 10s on his guitar. I like to use 10s for all of my guitars. I think they just work really well with these Fender style flat body bolt-on necks. And then here I'm just going back to the nut and making sure everything is aligned properly, and also the nut slots are the correct depth. Then I'll do some intonation work. I'll do a quick setup on the guitar, make sure all the strings are nice and close to the fretboard, and then tune everything up. The last step is installing the string tree at the headstock of the guitar. And here it is. I think this one turned out absolutely beautiful. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you made it this far, consider subscribing. All right, so I'm about to go meet up with my buddy, and I don't think he really knows that I'm going to give him a guitar. We have kind of been chatting on and off, like, hey, if you would want a guitar, like, what would you look for? And he's told me his list and everything. So I think maybe he might know, and it's kind of a little strange that I'm meeting up with him in the middle of the week, but we'll see how he responds. I'm really excited to give this to him. I think this is one of my favorite guitars I've made so far. So yeah, let's get to it. So this is my friend Dylan. He's a guitar player, plays, would you say, professionally, right? Like you travel to a bunch of gigs, and I've actually filmed you a couple times. Really good friend of mine. I just wanted to get your reaction on this guitar because it's probably one of my favorite guitars I've built so far.
Really? Your favorite?
Yeah.
Man.
So
that's a huge expectation. Wow.
Yeah, why don't you open it up? You like to check, like, you love looking at my guitars and help me design them too.
Dude, so. I remember the first guitar you made, and ever since then I've loved everything that you've brought out. So every time you do something new and I see you post about it or you bring it in, it's like, it's so exciting.
Yeah, he's gonna help me do a demo of it today, so
let's see what it is. Whoa. Dude. This is insane. The top on that is crazy.
I know, right?
Bro.
And just hold it up to the light too, because you really get
Check that out.
Sense of the figure on
the
that.
Stain too. I love that it's like so natural, but it's really vibrant. And it kind of reminds me of like a R9 Les Paul. Like,
yeah, it's kind of, and so it's a mix of like yellow and orange, so kind of like an amber. I really like how it turned out.
Dude, that turned out so good.
What do you think of it?
Dude, this is for sure probably one of the coolest guitars you've made.
I'm glad you like it because it's yours.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, dude.
What? Bro.
So in case, I guess I should probably explain. So Dylan has actually helped me kind of like bootstrap my guitar business. And basically every guitar that I've sold so far has come through a connection that Dylan has hooked me up with. So this is my way of saying thanks, Dylan. And
Dude, thank you.
I hope you like your new guitar.
Oh man, this is insane. This is beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, man, it's so hard not to talk about the work that you do because, dude, honestly, like I've owned lots of different high-end guitars, and ever since you brought the first one to me, I've been blown away. Like top-notch building and beautiful, really creative and unique.
Thanks,
bro.
man.
Thank you. This is such a wonderful gift.
Yeah, no, thank you, man.
Bro.
All right, so now we have to get some tones out of it. Let's
we gotta
jam.
play it now. Yeah.
Hey guys, if you made it this far, I just want to say thank you again for watching, and let's talk about the guitar I mentioned in the beginning of the video. So I'm going to be giving away this guitar. It's one of the last guitars that I hand built, so I hand carved the neck and I didn't use a CNC on the body. And I just want to say thank you for all the support that you guys have shown this channel. And under a month, we've gone from 0 to 1,500 subscribers, which is just amazing. And I think at the next milestone, which will probably be 5,000 or 10,000 subscribers, I haven't decided yet, I'm going to be giving this guitar away. So you want to make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned. And then going forward in the future, if we hit other significant milestones, I'll make more guitars to build and give to you guys. So I think it's just my kind of way of saying thank you for following along and watching. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.